Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we hang out, we talk about games. We talk about board games, role-playing games, card games, things that inspire us, things that are beautiful. And we're continuing with Riftsgiving, which is a little 3 episode arc that we're doing on the world of Rifts and with a focus on Savage Worlds and Savage Rifts. And if you missed our first episode, check it out from last week. It is just about, like I said, about Rifts. It's the world overview, kind of the setting overview, where I talk about how I got into Rifts and my deep and abiding love of this very strange, very unique world. And today we're going to look at, for lack of a better term, character classes. In Rifts proper, they are called O.C.C.s, Occupational Character Classes, or R.C.C.s, Racial Character Classes. And good morning to Grom and Padre. And in Savage Rifts, they are referred to as iconic frameworks. Now, here's the thing. Savage Worlds is a pretty simple game. I love it for its simplicity and its flexibility. It really delivers on fast, furious, and fun. Rifts characters are not simple characters. They tend to start with a lot of abilities. They tend to be very powerful and kind of increase from there. And so to recreate that, the guys at Savage Worlds had to create what they call iconic frameworks. And so if you're playing a Savage Rifts character, you're going to start off with a far more complicated character at your novice rank than you would have playing Deadlands well into the legendary ranks. That's just something to keep in mind as you look at this. They did an amazing job porting these iconic, pun intended, character options, because Rifts has some of the most iconic characters and classes in gaming. If you have ever encountered Rifts, you will know things about the Glitter Boy. Rook! Welcome back, sir. You have been missed. I hope that your Thanksgiving and holidays have gone well and that your kiddos are doing wonderfully. So, what are these iconic character options from Rifts? Well, I'm just going to go over just a couple of very high-level ones that personally I've played a ton of and loved. The main one being the Glitter Boy. The Glitter Boy is a massive suit of silvered power armor that takes half damage from lasers and has this gun that's so powerful, the boom gun that's so powerful, it creates sonic booms when it fires, and so it has to anchor itself and has thrusters that kick in to kind of counterbalance it when it fires this gun. It fires 300 rounds at a time in this like flechette canister that are basically little slugs of solid steel inside. And I remember looking through the Rifts book for the first time and seeing these diagrams of how the Glitter Boy is put together and how the boom gun goes together and what the ammo looks like. They were very detailed, and so they've had, lasting memories in my, like, indelible marks in my mind. You had things like the Juicer, whose motto was "Live fast, die young." Right? They had these chemical harnesses that they wore, and they had biocomputers, biocomps installed in their bodies that kept their bodies at the peak of human condition for about 2 to 7 years until their bones deteriorated and their organs liquefied, and the stress of it just killed them. You had Bursters, who were powerful pyrokinetics. Dog Boys, who were anthropomorphic mutant animals, harkening back to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles rules, which was another rule book from Palladium, which is actually, if you enjoy Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and other strangeness, that is a Kickstarter that's going on right now. It's almost done. I think we're in the last day, but they've crossed $1 million. It's got at least Eastman and Laird's art in it. They're kind of updating the book with an index and some new art, and go check it out. It's fantastic if you want to play mutant animals. in the Ninja Turtles universe. So, other ones, the crazies, they had mind over matter implants put in their head, and you were super capable as a combat character. But as you leveled up, you just started to gain more insanities. Rook, thank you as always for your generosity, sir. Cheers to you, mate. You could play a dragon. This is how powerful Rifts was. In the core rulebook, you could play a dragon. And as the game rolled on, more and more of these O.C.C.s and R.C.C.s came out. One of my favorite was the Tattooed Mages of Atlantis. You could play true Atlanteans who had magical tattoos that they could activate for either spell-like abilities or to summon weapons, encase weapons in flame. You had things like, in the core book, the Summoner. No, that was in Palladium Fantasy. You had the Leyline Walker, which was your standard magic user. You had the Techno Wizard, who built magical devices out of technology that allowed them to channel their powers. And you had the Mystic, who was both a scion and a magic user. So in Rifts, you just had this plethora of sources for abilities. You had cybernetics, you had robotics, you had power armor, you had psionics, you had magic, you had mutant animals. All of these existing in the same world. And then for me, the one that I loved the most, again, John Doom played it in our Savage Rifts game, the Cyber Knight. This warrior, noble warrior, part Templar, part Jedi, who could summon a Psi sword with just their force of will, and had armor that was implanted under their skin that was actually organic, like techno-organic, and could regrow when it was damaged. These are just... I have deep and abiding love for all of these classes because, again, for a decade, this is the game I played. So I had people who were constantly coming back to these iconic frameworks, as well as, they would start expanding. So, well, we had juicers. What if somebody tried to make a magical version of that? And then you had dragon juicers who had to hunt dragons and get alchemically treated dragon blood to recharge their harness. So these were all, and I'm not even touching on some of the weirder stuff that's in Rift's book, but these are kind of the core iconic classes that you had available to you. Rook, it is entirely possible to play a cybernetic enhanced psionic cat person in the game. Whether you are a cat person who is a DB, a dimensional being from another plane of existence where just cat folk live, or you're some experiment from Lone Star, the Coalition State Lone Star, who's doing genetic manipulation and creating mutant cat men. Or if you were a were-jaguar. The cybernetics might not work with a were-jaguar, if I remember correctly, because they have regeneration, and so inherently reject cyberware. But don't worry, the Atlantis book has you covered with BioWare, which is basically genetically modified symbiotes and parasites that could be implanted into magical creatures. So again, like I said, the gamut exists for Rifts. And so when you dig into all of the Savage Worlds, Savage Rifts games, you have more iconic frameworks to build off of, because... Oh, I did forget. Japan does have gen engineering as well. Because one of the things you would buy new Rifts books for is because every Rifts book had new O.C.C.s, new R.C.C.s, new magic, new technology. And so they've continued that tradition with Savage Rifts. There are currently 8 Rifts books out, with 2 more due out, I think, in January. And every one of them has new iconic frameworks. So, what does that mean from a Savage Worlds perspective? So, in Savage Rifts, you make a character just like you would in Savage Worlds, with 2 differences. One, you pick an iconic framework, which gives you a whole host of abilities, equipment, drawbacks on top of your regular Savage Worlds character. And then depending on how powerful that is, you get to roll on heroic background tables to get a couple of new powers, maybe a new piece of gear, something from your history that gives you better, improves your skills by a couple of points. But the one I'd like to look at this morning, just to kind of show that the people who were making this game clearly got Rifts in had a deep knowledge of Rifts. And the guy who did the Savage Rifts book now actually works at Palladium, Sean Owen Robertson. So let's take a look at the juicer. So one problem with the juicer in Rifts core is the fact that you had this timer. It was like 2 years plus 4d6 months or something like that. And the problem was, unless your GM followed Gary Gygax's rule of a meaningful campaign cannot be maintained without strict record keeping of time, that burnout never really happened. Yeah, you would know that, hey, at a certain point, my character was going to start suffering burnout, which means they got kind of better for a little bit, even better than normal, and then just dropped off significantly. So in Savage Rifts, they introduced something called the burn. So let's take a look at the juicer for Savage Rifts. First of all, juicers gain only one roll. Two rolls. They get one roll on body armor, close combat weapons, ranged weapons, training, or underworld and black ops, and then they get a second roll on the heroic background or hero's journey on any table they want, save for psionics and magic. So you get some better gear, and then you get to pick something and roll randomly on it. But what you get is you get something called the burn. So at any point, you can add your burn die to your rolls. Anything that's a agility, strength, or vigor-based trait roll. The burn die is 6 that cannot ace. So d6 that cannot ace. If you add your burn die to the trait roll, and the burn die result is a 1, you reduce your burn rating by 1. And as your burn rating goes down, your die gets larger. But also, when your burn value reaches 0, you burn out. So you're on a timer that you control. Savage Worlds, right? You have 2 dice. You have your trait die and your wild die, and you pick the higher of the 2. Burn is like a permanent conviction that you can call on after you roll whenever you want, at the risk of every time you roll it, the chances are that you're going to burn out. Morning, John. Oh, Padre, I hear you. I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying Savage Rifts, and yes, their current Black Friday sale was too tempting. Like that 50% off all VTT stuff was also just detrimental to my bank account. So that's the main mechanic. They put the burnout front and center as opposed to this timer that kind of exists in the back. The other things you get is you have an internal repair system. So you get slow regeneration. You get to make healing rolls once a day. You have super endurance, which means you get +2 to your vigor die types. Super reflexes, +2 to your agility die types. Super speed, you double your normal pace. And have a running die of D8 as opposed to a D6. Same thing for strength. And then you are at -2 to be hit by any attacks you're aware of. But on the flip side, you have complications. The more cyberware you get, your burn value lowers because your body just can't handle all of the extra strain of cybernetics. Death Wish, you start with the Death Wish minor hindrance because you know you're going to die. You can't use psionics or magic. And you're constantly in a mild ecstatic and stoned state due to the chemical process kind of keeping you euphoric. And so you have a -1 on all smarts or smart-linked rolls in non-combat situations. So they took all of the good stuff from the juicer. So in the juicer OCC, you have all of these things, but they basically are adding to your attributes. And in Rifts, if your attribute gets above a 16 or a 17, you start getting bonuses. And they converted them to Savage Worlds, but then again, they took the core of the class, this idea that you are taking on this drug harness that comes with a death sentence to live as a superhuman for a very brief amount of time. I think of Tom King's Batman run with Gotham and Gotham Girl. That's how their powers worked. They could shorten their lifespan to get to live this moment as a superhuman. And that's, I think, the core of a lot of the early Rifts O.C.C.s. So in Rifts, right, we talked about last time how the human-centric coalition was very much focused on preserving what they thought it meant to be human. And especially when you got into the towns and the areas around, outside the coalition, what it meant to be human was a little bit fuzzy, but most people focused on like trying to preserve Earth for humanity, preserve your village, preserve your way of life. And all of the O.C.C.s offered this interesting tension, or most of them. I think the Mars, the mercenaries, what does Mars stand for? Let me pull that up. The Mars O.C.C.s are on page 41 if you're following along at home. I always forget what this stands for. Mercenaries, adventurers, rogues, and scholars. They were humans. Everything else, you had to make the choice to play something less than human or different from human in order to protect what you loved. You know, adventurers go out to kind of defend towns, families, especially, we'll talk about the Tomorrow Legion on Thursday, which is something new that they added specifically for Savage Rifts. But all of these O.C.C.s, if you play a cyborg, you're cutting away parts of your humanity in order to become a better defender of humanity. Same with the juicer and the crazy. You are literally taking away your life or your sanity in order to protect those you love for a shorter amount of time. If you're playing a scion or a magic user, you are definitely other and dealing with things other than kind of baseline humanity. Even the Cyber Knights, they have, you know, the stalwart defenders of honor and light in the Rifts universe have undergone training and treatments and implants that mark them as more than and less than human. Most of my Rifts games tend to focus on that. It's because Rifts has a lot of cyberpunk in it, and that was something that always stood out to me, that all of these classes you can play remove you from humanity by several steps. And therefore, like, it makes you kind of heroic. You're willing to take on these things in order to... Now, granted, there's a lot of moral grayness, and I've had plenty of characters at my table who became a juicer for the money and the fame, or the power of a cyborg to leave the weakness of flesh behind. So I'm not saying this is a ubiquitous theme among all Rifts games. It's just one of the themes that I like bringing out in Rifts games. So that brings us to an end of our discussion of iconic frameworks and how they work in Rifts and Savage Rifts. We're going to talk about the Tomorrow Legion and kind of some of the setting books that have come out. One of the neat things that they've done with Savage Rifts is each of the later books, so Arcana and Mysticism, Enemies of Humanity, or Empires of Humanity, Blood and Banes, and Atlantis and the Demon Seas, all have plot point campaigns in the back. So the front half is new iconic frameworks and R.C.C.s. The middle section is the GM information, and then you get a plot point campaign at the end of it. So we'll kind of talk about all of that, Tomorrow Legion and the plot point campaigns in the books on Thursday, bringing Riftsgiving to an end. And then in December, we're starting our Malazadvent event. If you follow along on our Instagram, Tinker Hellraiser is preparing one a day a series of Malazan Advent posts for us. So Tink, thank you so much for that. And we're going to be talking about Malazan Books of the Fallen because it's Christmas and I want to be able to talk about something that I love. And then in January, we're going to be talking about Castles and Crusades. I had an amazing interview with Stephen Chenault of Trollord Games last night. It's going to go live today at 5 on the Iconic Production YouTube channel. Just about working with Gary Gygax and the new Kickstarter they've got, The Hermit, and talking about the origins of Castles, Crusades, and Aird. And in January, we're going to do a deep dive into the books and the system. And I'm really looking forward to that. We have a couple of other Beyond the Tables interviews that I'm working on finalizing times and schedules. So I'll announce those on the Iconic Production Discord channel as soon as I have sign off from everybody who wants to be there. So John Doom said, JM, if they remove the Cyber Knight, what would be your favorite class to play, and what class has never seemed to hold a lot of interest for me to play? Oof, that's a good question. So my number one character, we all had our favorite characters in our Rifts game. Again, it was this, I don't know that I'll ever replicate it, but we had this Rifts group in high school and college where there were about 12 to 16 players, maybe as many as 20 at some point, and about 8 of us were GMs. And so by the end of it, we had this interlinking mythology with our characters, and we would show up at my buddy's house in a little suburb of Milwaukee on like Friday afternoon, and we would play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then go back to college Sunday evening. And it was just, who has an adventure idea? All right, what level, what characters? Sometimes there were like specific characters that were requested. Sometimes it was, hey, here's the level range I'm thinking of, or hey, here's a new starting adventure. And we would just play multiple adventures over the weekend. And so Simon was I think he's, the last time I looked at his character sheet and updated it, I think he's like a 3rd level demigod, but he started off as a ninja juicer out of the Rifts book. I love the idea of juicers. And one of the players in my group at the time in high school, we were sort of dancing around a romantic dalliance, and so our characters obviously had a romantic dalliance, and she was playing an ice dragon who was shapeshifted into a human form. When she discovered that my character would eventually die, she seduced him into a cave, cut all of his juicer lines, and went to sleep with her claw on top of him so that he forcibly detoxed. And so then I became a mystic ninja for a while, and then jumped over, somehow was gifted with psionics. So yeah, I really enjoyed I enjoy the juicers, especially when tied back to the kind of the death wish mentality of it. That, what's the Kurgan from Highlander? Better to burn out than fade away. And the fact that it's called Burnout probably means it was inspired a little bit by the Kurgan. So juicers, John Doom, and after juicers, Atlantean tattoo mages. Those are tattoo warriors. Those are like my top 3 if Cyber Knights are removed from the table. Yeah, what's never appealed to me, I don't want to play a dragon. Dragons never appealed to me. Well, I love the Glitter Boy. I've never wanted to play a Glitter Boy pilot. Yeah. I don't know why. Like, power armor pilots just never really appealed to me. When I was younger. Maybe now I would enjoy them. Now, John also asked me a question after the last one that we're going to cover right here at the end. But first of all, John, yeah, it was a great interview. I loved the fact that so Stephen Chenault was telling us about their first Gen Con and how basically he was in the middle of a PhD program and was like, yeah, I guess this is it. Like, this is eventually we're going to be done selling these adventures, so I better get my ticket of Gen Con out of the company while I can. And 3 weeks after that Gen Con, he was signing contracts with Gary Gygax to do a bunch of books because they met Gary and hit it off at Gen Con. And just how one little trip can totally change your entire destiny. Bursters are fantastic. Zappers are also cool. They have zappers in the Arcana and Mysticism, which is basically an electrokinetic. You'd love to play a glitter boy. Lots of power, sure, with the idea of having to leave your armor to interact in most cases. Yeah, Grom, I like that as well. Maybe we'll have to do another Savage Rifts game for the iconic patrons. Not streamed, just a fun, off-stream game. But so John Doom asked, why play Rifts as opposed to any of these other games where you can have your peanut butter and your chocolate mixed together? And I think for me, what makes Rifts unique is the setting. They went out of their way to make a setting where anything goes and where almost absurdly delightful levels of power and balance exist. Like, you could have a character who's a rogue scholar, which basically means you're a professor. Like, you like recovering the history of the past, and you're not really great in a fight, but by God, you have a ton of skills. And that guy exists in the same party with a dragon, or a guy who's piloting a 12-foot tall chromed suit of power armor that whenever he fires his weapon, all glass within a mile shatters. Palladium is of an earlier game design philosophy, which basically was, damn the torpedoes, balance can go to hell. Because there's no attempt at game balance. Game balance is something that happens at the table with the GM and the players, not something that's mechanically enforced. And the other reason is, again, at the time, original Torg had chocolate and peanut butter, but they were pretty, there were dividing lines. You could go around and collect things from different realities and kind of mix them together. But there was nothing like what we have kind of in Torg Eternity, where there's, cosms colliding. And so you could have this powerful magical cult summoning an elder god in the middle of a high-tech city guarded by psionic wards, and that was fine. Like, really, Rifts was one of those settings, a lot like Torg, where whatever popped into your mind as a player or as a GM could and probably did exist. And that was something kind of really special to an impressionable teenager who was just getting into role-playing games. Just the boundless creativity that could exist in here. And then they had the Dimension books, so you could go to Wormwood, which was this living planet where symbiotes were the technology, and they were in this eternal war versus demons. And then they had the Phase World books, where it's like, hey, do you want to play in a space opera setting where one of the major superpowers of the galaxy, or the 3 galaxies, is the United Worlds of Warlock, who are flying around with their magical spaceships? Yeah, hell yeah, I want to play all of this. And so the other thing that was interesting is they very rarely put out adventures. There were a couple early adventures. The rest were just these little hook, line, and sinkers. These 3-part, like an opening hook, some event in the middle, and then how it possibly could wrap up. And that's how they did adventure design. And so for me, that's why I very rarely run modules, because my guiding lights in the formative years of my gaming were just outlines of adventures, three beat stories that I got to take and just expand out. I think the first boxed adventure that I ran was for Shadowrun. My buddy ran Harlequin, which was just a fantastic adventure for Shadowrun. And I ran Harlequin's back because I really liked Earth Dawn more than Shadowrun, and it was the adventure that kind of bridged the two. So it was a while before I ever even realized that I needed modules, if that makes sense. OTORG had some issues with power creep. The early archetypes were not as good as the thing in the Tharkol book. Yeah. Rifts has the same thing. Each new book brought cooler and far more powerful baseline characters and technology and magic and robots than the core Rifts book, which I think is one of the reasons they revised the original Rifts book, was to kind of say, all right, here's where we started, here's where we're at now, let's bring these guys kind of in the same range. So, yeah. I still don't know, like, Padre, we need to have a discussion at some point on how OTORG ended, because I've heard that most fans felt like they flubbed the landing, but I don't know what that flub is, and I would love to hear about it sometime. So, that's it for today's Behind the Screen. We'll be back on Thursday, where we're going to wrap up by talking about the Tomorrow Legion and the plot point campaigns and the books that are available. We're less than 5 people away, I think, from giving away our Fading Suns collection to one lucky subscriber on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please consider doing so. Please consider giving us a like or on YouTube, or follow here, leave a comment. I try to get back to all of them. And if you'd like to, jump over to the Iconic patronage on patreon.com/Iconic Production. Join us. We're revamping it all in December. We have a whole new plan to roll out in January, so looking forward to that. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and go play some Savage Worlds or Castles and Crusades or whatever your favorite game is. I'll see you all later. Have a good one.